Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Ciptor, HYPR, and FEITIAN Technologies joint webinar. I'm Louise Hauser, Integration and Channel Partnerships Manager from FEITIAN Technologies US. I will be your moderator for today's event. Before we officially begin, I'd just like to let you know that you can type down your questions if you have any at the field below the presenter screen player, and we will answer them accordingly at the Q&A portion towards the end of the webinar. Today, we will be joined by Mikhail Zaman-Rodin, CEO and cybersecurity expert from Ciptor, Kevin Turner, VP of Sales Engineering from HYPR, Ruby Khaira, VP of Sales from HYPR, Gautam Vij, Chief Revenue Officer from FEITIAN Technologies, and myself. This webinar is all about passwordless authentication, Ciptor and FEITIAN compatibility, MFA trends and drivers, FEITIAN integration with Ciptor and HYPR MFA, Windows Workstation login using FEITIAN K9 with PIV. So without further ado, let's begin.
Thank you, Louise. I start to share my screen here. And in the first session here today, we will start with me from Ciptor, Michael. And we are a global company working together with HYPR and FEITIAN to help organizations and people to get passwordless. And our mission normally is to transform the passwordless authentication experience and also to improve the employee and the consumer user experience, which is one of the most critical things today when you deploy passwordless authentication in an organization, both internally and externally. And in our global network, we have offices around the world. We have offices in Canada, in the US, we have in Sweden, Belgium, Finland, Switzerland, in a couple of countries in the Southeast Asia and also in Africa, which make it possible for us to easily help global organizations to deploy passwordless authentication and to do local technical support and also to supply products locally with local company with the local invoices, etc., in their own currency, which is a very beneficial opportunity when you scale your passwordless experience for especially physical things. And inside Ciptor, we work and we design innovative digital authentication, especially with the FEITIAN security keys together with the HYPR solution. And we use this for different scenarios. It is both for consumer authentication. We do it for employee authentication. We also work with increasing the experience when you do deployment of authentication, and also to achieve zero trust architecture design when you set up passwordless authentication in your organization. And also in the background, we create and collect analytics that can make it possible for you to understand what's going on in your organization during a day. And we also make sure that all the technology will work on omni-channel basis, which means that it will work on tablets, it will work on Android phones, on iOS phones, it will work on MacBooks, on PC, etc. And if you see to the like the digital transformation that is happening today, I will not spend too much time on this because I assume that most of you have been listening a lot what's going on the market. But there is 4 megatrends that is driving the acceleration for risk when you do authentication today. And the first risk that you have today is the digital transformation. And with the digital transformation, you also create new applications. We have new ways of how we work today, and we also have new edges that we need to secure. And here you have a lot of attacks and risk that you can see, especially that happening during this COVID time we have had now, the increase of attacks and cyber malware have increased a lot around the world. We also have this trend when we now work from home. So then our home worker, they become remote targets, and they are normally working from their internal networks with home routers. They are reusing VPNs, etc. And there is a big employee gap on how they understand the risk of connecting from a home router and using the IT from your house. Because normally when you work in an office, you have all this security from your IT department, how everything is patched and made in the best way due to the best practice you have in your organization. And we also have this 5G coming up. When we deploy 5G, you will also see that the bandwidth that will increase will also increase the speed. And when you increase the speed and the bandwidth, the attacks on 5G will also increase. We will also see new distributed architectures of new solutions in the market, and there will be less time for companies and organizations to respond when an attack actually will happen. And then we also have this transformation where many organizations today are looking into moving on from an on-premise infrastructure, and you go to a cloud computing transformation. And here you have a lot of new risk that you don't have the experience of how to handle. And here you will have an increased risk for how you store and secure your data. You will also start to share information online instead of on-premise. And then also there is new way of how you access this online data. And behind all this kind of cloud computing, you also backed up with the compliance from cybersecurity law that are different depending on where in the world you actually exist. So that is very hard for companies and organizations to handle. So this is the like the information and the trend that we see for the digital transformation today. And normally when we went into organization today, how the current situation looks like, this is very common what we find out. And there is that we still have the credentials, we have passwords, we have secret information is stored on Excel sheets. We can see that people are working from home remotely without any two-factor authentication and multi-factor authentication, and they are sharing a lot of critical information remotely. And this is a huge risk when you're running a company to lose information. And we can also see these famous post-it notes. They are still existing. We find it under computers, on the backside of mobile phones. When you have shared devices, you have the password there, which means that it's creating a big risk, and also for the audit, it can be very hard to understand who was actually responsible for this incident. And then you have an ongoing landscape where you have digital transformation everywhere around your company. And if you think about it by yourself, last time that you actually did a digital onboarding interaction, either internally in your own company, or if you become a customer to one service that you start using. It can be like online shopping, research, education. You maybe had a new job or a new role inside your organization, or you need to have access to a new application. What was your feeling about it? What was it like? Easy interaction? What was the effort that kind of interaction was presented to you? This is one of the most common issue you have today when you are an organization, when you're working online. You need to interact with people, both in your company, but also outside your company. And here is very critical that you find out new ways of how you can make it with less friction, with the right level of security, and you need to make it in a very easy way. Otherwise, it will be negative for your both revenue, but also for your experience. And when it comes to Ciptor, we just released a new solution, and that is named IT Safe Shop. And this is a platform where we have uploaded all our security keys from FEITIAN, and we also have uploaded the software from HYPR, and we have here certified people that you can purchase both the service for how you can deploy this in your company and how you can implement passwordless authentication for your organization in a very easy way. So we can handle all the chain from the first interaction until the last interaction, actually, when you start using the service. And what we are doing inside Ciptor and IT Safe is that we deploy the passwordless authentication for organizations worldwide. We also provide organization with support. We have standard support that is working between 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. Weekdays. And then we also have add-ons where you can get premium support. So we can cover you also until late on weekdays, but also the weekends. We have highly skilled experts that are certified both by HYPR and from FEITIAN, who can find out like the gap that you have before you start planning for passwordless authentication, but also that help you through all that hassle that come up when you implement new ways of working. And we also give you management to follow up and to monitor everything that will happen during the time that you're using it. And we can also handle all this kind of deployment with fixed monthly cost per user. So you don't need to have a burden with a high investment. For example, if you do a large number of users that you want to purchase security keys for, we can handle that with a fixed monthly cost. So you have a more easy transaction financially in your company. And this is what we see is a huge demand right now for organizations to buy security keys in combination with software in this way. And we also provide you with all the tools that you need to deploy the passwordless authentication in your company, so you can become like a leader in your own industry. And what we also is focusing on a lot is to provide like minimize the gap in your company, so that the employees that want to access their computers or they want to log out from their computers, they want to access applications either with their mobile phone as a security key or different flavors from the security keys that FEITIAN is providing. And we have also for the introduction now with the online store with IT Safe Shop start to do some campaigns. So we will send this out during the week. So we start a collaboration with Jabra. So everyone who now place orders for HYPR and FEITIAN, they will also get a little bit of a bonus with a Jabra speaker, including in the package. And we cover inside Ciptor and IT Safe, we cover worldwide delivery. We can handle local payments. You can pay in any currency, no matter what country you are. And we have local people that are certified, they are experienced, and they can have a very professional approach against your company. So you can decide to maybe ship out products to 20 countries, 30 countries, and you don't need to think about how we're going to ship it here, how we're going to handle the VAT, how we're going to handle the internal invoicing, etc. We will handle all that kind of hassle for your company. And all the products and the people that we have in the organization, everyone is certified, and they are also trusted by a large number of clients that already are using this. And we have been in this industry for security keys from 2009. So I would say that we have extremely high understanding and knowledge about what you can do with a security key. There is a lot of programming and settings that you can adjust. So you can combine it, for example, for PIV applets to work in a Microsoft environment, for example. Then we can connect it to your Microsoft certificates, and we can make self-service administration for deployment, etc. And we can also connect it to a lot of different services. And all the inventory we have of security keys, they are brand new, because we have a very high revenue, like recurring stock that we are constantly changing. So I would say we change our inventory about 3 to 4 times a month. We have new products in stock, so we never have any old items that are outdated or something. So everything we have in stock is in latest firmware, and they have the latest function on it. And we also have always 100% satisfaction money back guarantee as well. And this was my last slide for today's presentation. Then I will hand over the presentation to Kevin at HYPR, who will dig in more in the technical details for how HYPR are integrating the FEITIAN security keys to make it possible to use HYPR as a solution to your workforce and for customers to access different applications in a very easy way.
Okay, thank you very much, Michael. I'll share my screen now. You can just stop sharing your screen. Thank you, that's great. So I'll now share my screen, and we'll look at the presentation first. So hopefully everybody can see my screen now. And we're going to go through a few slides, and then after that we'll then go through a demonstration so you get a better idea of how HYPR works. So the passwordless company, obviously passwordless as a technology is being talked about more and more these days, both by authentication vendors like ourselves and Ciptor and FEITIAN, but also the identity and access management vendors. HYPR have been doing passwordless though, which is why we like to give ourselves the title the passwordless company now, for close to 7 years in bringing authentication without the use of a password. So a little bit about the organization. If you haven't heard of us before, we're a company that is just dedicated to driving passwordless login capabilities for 2 different types of use cases, either for the consumer or for the employees, which is what we're largely here to talk about here today. We're still a privately owned VC capital-backed company. Some of our financial backers there, including Comcast, MasterCard, and Samsung. And as an organization, well, we're pretty much coming from the identity and access management DNA. I myself were previously working at Okta and RSA, and my colleagues in the pre-sales team and the technical roles have been coming from organizations similar, and Ping and Duo as well. Along the bottom there, you can see some of our companies that have taken on HYPR, probably the most notable of which was the Bank of America, This is a recent win, and they're going to be using HYPR for the same use case that we're looking at and exploring here this afternoon for their 300,000 user population. As I mentioned, HYPR is really all about providing two methods of authentication to different types of use cases, either to the consumer or to the employee. And it's probably more on the employee side of the line of business that we see the employees either using a combination of a phone or the security token keys like the FEITIAN key that's represented there. And it's being used in a couple of areas in particular with the workforce, where we're helping the employees to log on more securely and more quickly to the desktop itself, and then also to then authenticate to their corporate applications that they'll be gaining access to. A quick snapshot before a customer really embarks upon a passwordless future is this is a typical customer, one of our more recent customers, and they were close to spending $700,000 per year on password resets costs alone. They lost what they believe to be 3.7 million hours of typing in passwords, or indeed resetting the passwords as well. And in actual fact, they took security very seriously and had actually invested close to $900,000 on legacy MFA. And I talk about legacy on the basis of those solutions that have been around for quite a long while that perhaps aren't passwordless, but they're two-factor. But they're not really using those as methods to successfully authenticate to the desktop. So HYPR really highlight this as a desktop MFA gap. And again, Gartner, as illustrated here, they're really talking about and endorsing the use of MFA and going a passwordless future. So when I'm talking about legacy, I'm really talking about perhaps some of the older style. So you've maybe got perhaps the Microsoft Authenticator or Google or Duo, the authentication, or RSA, where I previously used to work for myself. And those solutions are really used more as a second factor. So they're based around solutions that were predominantly using passwords. So you'd use a username, password, and then you, although very good, you'd be using the two-factor authentication as an additional layer of security, which of course is vital in today's world. But it doesn't, unfortunately, get rid of the hacker's favorite target, which is the password itself. And quite often, those older style MFA solutions are quite slow. Certainly on the consumer side, they add quite a lot of end-user friction. And as I say, not many of those solutions have been particularly successful in resolving that desktop MFA gap. The other thing that's worthwhile noting is that on the authentication side of things, even if you are using something like a phone, when you register your authenticator, effectively it uses symmetric keys. So the same key that is used to uniquely identify your phone is the same key that gets stored somewhere centrally. So much the same as a password, central storage. And of course, this was the problem a few years back, admittedly, where RSA lost some of their symmetric keys. They called them seed records, and they needed to replace close to 400 million tokens worldwide. So the HYPR solution entered really 6 years, almost 7 years, with a solution that was fundamentally different. Instead of using symmetric keys, it was going to use asymmetric key cryptography and fully embraces the concepts of FIDO and FIDO2 as the standards, whereby instead of using symmetric keys, you use asymmetric, and the private key that is generated as part of a registration flow actually gets created and stored on the user's authenticator. So you would use that as the authentication replacement for a password, and a corresponding public key would then get stored in the authentication server. The benefit of using a FIDO authentication flow is that it is resistant to phishing. By default, the private key that gets registered for the application or service that you register your authentication credentials for is tied to that unique service. So if it was a man in the middle or a proxy-based attack, the private key would not even be used as part of that authentication flow. So as I say, it helps to eliminate phishing, dramatically reduces fraud. In fact, one of our customers has reckoned that they've reduced it by 99.9%. And of course, because you're not using credentials with usernames and passwords, it can eliminate the credential stuffing attacks that are also happening today as well. And it's not just HYPR that are saying that this is the right way of going. We've had companies like Microsoft, for example, over the last 18 months now, strongly recommending the use of the Windows Hello for Business. We've also had the Google team with their Android operating systems and the Chrome browsers heavily supporting and endorsing the FIDO Alliance and the methodologies. And late last year, we also had Apple finally joining the party as well. I love the analogy here on the phone of the Vegas approach of what happens on your phone stays on your phone. And of course, we all know that each of these technologies work pretty nicely independently. So an Apple will work well with an Apple environment, and Microsoft works well with a Microsoft environment. But what we do also tend to find is that the solutions sometimes don't span across all the various operating systems and platforms that we might want to use in our business life today. The benefit of a HYPR, where we're looking at an independent, is obviously we've built a solution that can sit right away across those solutions. But nonetheless, it is also endorsing our philosophy that we selected close to 7 years ago. Specifically in the identity and access management space, we see obviously the employees needing to gain access to multiple applications like identity providers to providing single sign-on. So this would include the Oktas, the OneLogins, the Pings, the ForgeRocks of this world in being able to provide a strong authentication to those services. Particularly in today's environment where we've got many of the employees and administrators working remotely, they're needing to connect back in over virtual private networks to their corporate resources. And of course, most organizations, if not all today, are moving out to the cloud, gradually changing obviously to technologies like Microsoft 365 or Salesforce or Google Suite. And they're accessing those cloud applications, and quite often you might even get a vendor supplying an authenticator for that dedicated application. For example, Salesforce, they provide their own MFA solution. And then you've still got many organizations today, especially the larger corporates, that are making use of virtual desktop infrastructures. And whilst we're talking about operating systems, it's not probably just Windows right the way across the desktop. There will also be the use of the Mac, the iPads that are being used. And as you can see along the bottom there, we have a range of different authenticators. And it's becoming fragmented from a legacy MFA. The users have still got too many passwords. And so HYPR's aspiration is to provide a common authentication set of options, be it the use of the mobile phone and the security tokens like the FEITIAN token that's represented here in the middle of the screen. So these are the solutions that HYPR are offering. And what I'd like to do now is just to spend a few seconds then to look at the use of a FIDO authentication flow, if it's not maybe familiar to some of those on the call today. So the first thing is you have a client. So in this instance, I'm showing a phone, but likewise, as I say, it could be a FIDO token or a security token, like the FEITIAN K9 token that I should be using as part of my demonstration. One thing that I will say, though, specifically on the security tokens, is that we do make use of two different types of authentication protocols. We make use of FIDO2, and we also make use of the PIV protocol for the personally identifiable information that you store on the security token in the form of a smart card. More about that in a moment. So when you register your authenticator, a private key will get generated and stored and never leave, incidentally, the authenticator. And a corresponding public key will get deposited in the authentication server of, I'm showing here the HYPR True Passwordless Cloud as an offering. So when you open up either HYPR in a native mobile application, or indeed when using any of these authenticators to authenticate maybe to a web application. So if your web application, such as your IDP or the Office 365 is sitting here at the tip of the arrow, you would be passing in the user's name to perform an authentication request, or if it was directly from the phone, the user's name will be passed to the back end for an authentication to take place when opening up the application. Within the HYPR database, we will then store the various applications that people are wanting to authenticate to, look through the named application that the user was requesting, find the user, and then would then send, using the push technology, a push notification to the user's mobile, or in the case of a token, it will be obviously plugged into the workstation. So the push and cryptographic challenge will be sent out to the user's authenticator. It would also have a corresponding policy. And in the policy, we would then be prompting the user for their previously registered biometric that they used when they were performing the registration and the generation of the original private key. So the user will use touch, face, or eye, depending on the native biometric that the phone supports. And if the phone doesn't have a biometric capability, HYPR do provide the method for a decentralized PIN. I use the word decentralized very deliberately because the PIN is only ever stored here on the phone and is never stored centrally. And it's used like a biometric to effectively identify yourself as the owner of that device. If you get that authentication or biometric gesture correct, we then grant access to the private key, and the private key is then used, but never leaves the device, to sign the digital challenge and send it back as a signed response. HYPR then receives the response, plucks out the user's corresponding public key, checks to make sure it was signed with a private key, and if it was, we've then got the successful authentication flow. So that 1 through to 7 is a classic FIDO authentication flow and underpins the principles in how we adopt the authentication within the HYPR solution. This is the type of flow that will be used either for a native mobile application or for a web interaction using a FIDO2 flow. Looking closer maybe at the employee access, it's a slightly different situation in this flow. So in this instance here, we've still got a user, and in this case, instead of just a browser, we've now got the user's workstation. And the user, during the registration flow, would typically have an authenticated session onto that workstation. Either he's been able to log in, or maybe if he's a brand new employee, maybe an administrator's logged him into the workstation for the first time registration flow. On the workstation, we install a HYPR desktop client. In the case of Windows, this is a credential provider, and this credential provider is configured so that it knows how to talk to the authentication server and also to the application that it's going to be registering to. When the user now wants to perform a registration, he'll click on the button, which will then give them the option to either register a phone or to register with a token. And we'll be seeing both of these use cases in the demonstration in a moment. In this case, let's say we pick the phone. What will happen is a QR code will then be being displayed. The user will then pick out their phone and will scan the QR code. As I mentioned, this client knows how to communicate to the HYPR server, and embedded in this QR code that the phone's now just read will be the same configuration, so that it now knows also how to communicate to the same regular HYPR server and will make a registration request. Against each of the applications, we'll have a registration policy, which will be then passed back to the requesting authenticator. In this instance, the user will be then prompted to use their biometric to register themselves with, or the PIN. And once successful, that will then create the private key that is then generated and stored securely on the device. In the case of HYPR, we make use of hardware-backed storage, so this would include either the trusted execution environment or else the secure enclave on the iPhone. And then a corresponding public key then gets generated in the HYPR server. Using this particular flow sequence, this is the minimum that you'd require for a FIDO authentication flow and to log into web applications. But then when we're talking about workstations, there will be a communication or response that the client then receives to say that everything so far has happened correctly. And now, on behalf of the user, the client will then make a certificate signing request, which will then request a private public key pair for the Microsoft Active Directory server, certificate server. Now, as I mentioned, the client knows how to communicate to HYPR, as does now the phone. And what we do is we create an encrypted tunnel and we transfer the private key that would ordinarily be stored here in the user's TPM, and we pass that and write that back onto the user's mobile phone, and a corresponding public key will get written here to the certificate authority on premise. And it's at this point we've now converted that user's smartphone to a smart card, or in the case of a FEITIAN key, would have converted that to a smart card too. Graphically on the mobile phone, we will actually see some dynamic branding take place there, so your company logo and color schemes can be used, and a little circular disc which will represent the pairing of this mobile phone with this workstation here. And in the case of if you had registered a security token, the token would be plugged into the workstation and a corresponding little key would also be represented. So in this instance here, the final process on this HYPR desktop client, which acts both as a registration portal and also as the communication channel between the user and the workstation and the back-end services. So that's provided the flow of some of the use cases that I was going to be exploring in a moment in a demonstration. So my last slide is really just to summarize in saying we're providing the HYPR passwordless capability to eliminate workforce passwords, to solve the desktop MFA gap, to eliminate the phishing and password reuse attacks that our employees are certainly pretty bashed to bits at the moment with their current form when they're working remotely. And to that end, technologies like RDP and VPN attacks are also very prevalent at the moment, and the HYPR passwordless solutions, which we see in the demonstration in a moment, can also help resolve those and eliminate those fatigue points as well. So what I'd like to do then is to now go to my presentation. Where I'm going to run through a sequence of events that will be providing us access to the demo. Let's recap then on what we've just seen in the registration flow. So here on the left-hand side, I've got my mobile phone, and here on the logged in desktop, I've got my HYPR desktop client. I double click on the icon and start up the HYPR mobile application. This acts, as I mentioned, both as a registration portal and also the communication between the workstation desktop and the back-end operating system for the Windows servers. I'm going to now click for Ask for Pairing, and in this option, I'll be given the choice of either the security key, FEITIAN key, or the smartphone. I'm going to use the smartphone. If I click on the smartphone, it'll then display me a QR code. I begin pairing, and then on the mobile, I click the top right-hand corner to select the option to do scan QR code. It'll then go through the registration policy. And this time it's recognized that I've got Touch ID, so I'll use Touch. And now during that flow, a private key for FIDO is being created, and also a private key for Microsoft has also been created and stored on the user's mobile phone. Now that the pairing has taken place, I can actually click on the bubble, represents the pairing of this user, the HYPR user, and I can choose to lock the computer remotely. And now when I walk back to the workstation, I want to log in, I mobile initiate the authentication by clicking on the bubble. It will then send the policy to authenticate with my touch, and then it will then make a FIDO-based authentication, and if successful, it will then present my Microsoft private key from my mobile through to the desktop to perform a smart card PKI authentication. So that's providing the mobile phone. Now let's look at the experience with the FEITIAN key. So this time I'm going to actually pairing a new device. And I've got my FEITIAN key plugged into my virtual workstation here. So I click on the key, and of course the key comes with a default temporary PIN. So we'll select the right default PIN option, and then HYPR will ensure that we give a PIN associated to my user that's currently logged in. So I'm typing in my PIN to go through the registration flow. Now this time it will create and request a certificate signing request from the Microsoft Active Directory Certificate Authority, and we'll actually write that directly to the plugged-in key that I've got here on my workstation. We can now see that I've got a combination of both the mobile phone and a FEITIAN key that are being registered. So let's now lock the computer. I can do this from my mobile phone or using the standard Windows lock commands. And now when I come to the desktop, instead of using the mobile phone, I'm going to use the options here that are displayed to me to say sign in options. So I click here and we can see that the smart card is available. So I click on the smart card option. Now obviously I need to type in my PIN to access the smart card. Click yes, and now I'm going to be logged in using that FIDO token that we've now got associated to our identity there. Now you can also use HYPR for other purposes other than just logging into the desktop. Let's look at another option. I've now inserted my administrator patient key in the same way that I was using it as the user. I would start, for example, maybe the services application. In this instance, and here it will start this process as the current logged in user, the HYPR user. And unfortunately, he doesn't have any privileges. But what we can do is we can use HYPR through the HYPR desktop client to be used as part of the run as command. So in this instance, in here now, I'm going to run this command as the administrator. As I mentioned, I've currently got my administrator security key now plugged in, so I can click on this user's identity, type in the PIN to associate and access the application, and it will now start the application as that current user associated to the security key. And in this case, it's an administrative account, so I can now start and stop services quite easily. I can also use either the key or the phone for things like the RDP protocol as well. In this instance, I've got my desktop here. I'm going to ask to connect to my domain controller. Click on that server. The regular connection dialog box will then pass. At the moment, as you can see, I have got my administrator key already plugged in, but this time I'm going to actually choose to use my phone. So in this instance, rather than using the HYPR user, I click on the top bubble here, where you've got the K-Turner user, click on that. It'll then provide me a FIDO-based authentication, and then provide the authentication. And now it will now present my administrator private key from my phone for that running application and pass the identity through to the RDP protocol as well. So here we are logging in as the K-Turner to my domain controller and the remote connection. Let's now go and have a look at the administration console of HYPR. I'm going to connect to my administration console from my POD server that I'm running here. And I've got a couple of options as to how I can authenticate. I can either use the phone or I can use smart devices. In this case, a smart device could either be a platform authenticator or could be the FEITIAN key. In this instance, I'm going to use my Touch ID to enable me to authenticate through that particular resource. I'm going to go to the workstation application that we'll be using, which is called Workforce Access, and we can look at the configuration. In this instance, we can see that we're allowing domain joined computers. We've enabled the security key options. We've also got roaming users. This is particularly useful where you've registered your identity for one computer, but it enables you to log up to any other domain joined computer and be able to log in using the HYPR mobile or the plugged in FEITIAN key. We've also got an option for offline mode, and this is available so that you can have a number of pins, a number of offline days that you're going to have in there, and a pin length. And then the other thing is what happens if you've forgotten your key or your mobile phone one day. We have also a recovery token capability as well. And in this instance, it's configured for a 72-hour period, but we could change that down to say maybe just a 24-hour period with that policy. Now we look at the users who have been registered, and I've got a few users that have been registered here so far. My HYPR user was my current logged in user, so let's go down and look at that. We can see that they're logged into this client, and this is the machine name. I can see that this user is registered both with an iPhone, and we registered today on the 8th, and we've got a FEITIAN key that again has registered on the April here earlier on. So I can see that this user's got two devices. And this is the recovery token. So if the user did forget to bring in their phone or their token one day, we can click to reveal and we can provide this out of band token that the user can then use for this 24-hour period of time. Let's finish off the demonstration with a couple of looks at logging into web applications. I'll pull up my preferred browser. I've got some bookmarks at the top here. One of the options is you can integrate HYPR with identity providers. So you could be looking to integrate with the Okta or OneLogin Active Directory Federation services. Let's look at it with maybe the Okta tenant that I have here. So we go to the login page. This user is already registered, And then when we click the option to select the user, it will then detect that this user has previously been registered, and as a consequence will then prompt you to authenticate using HYPR rather than a password. I click sign in as an option here, and I've registered multiple devices, platform authenticated, such as the Touch ID that you saw me use earlier, or Windows Hello if it was a Windows machine. I can also make use of a mobile phone using your HYPR mobile application. And in this instance, I've also registered my K9 patient key here. So if I now click on this icon, this will then prompt me to access the certificate from the private key. I now use the PIN code. At this point now, having accessed the security key, I would need to just touch the security key to then provide the authentication. And now I'm into my Okta portal page. Another option that we could look at is logging into maybe Office 365. Again, click on the link, click sign in. This has been configured so that it would redirect the Active Directory Federation services, which have been configured to use HYPR. The user ID is to get pulled through. Click sign in. Again, I could use a combination of either the Windows Hello for Business or my Touch or my key. This time I use the key again. PIN needs to be accessed. Type in my PIN. And of course, I'll need to touch the token to approve the authentication. Now I'm accessing my Office 365 application using a true passwordless authentication into the application. Okay, well, thank you very much. That's finished my demonstration. I'd like to now hand over to Gutham for the last part of the presentation.
All right, wonderful. Thank you so much, Kevin. That was a fantastic demo. I was constantly looking at all the details and it was so impressive. I've seen this before, but I think it's so important for people to see how easy it is to use passwordless with the help of HYPR and with the help of Ciptor's solutions in terms of services. What I want to share next is just some details in terms of where the trends are of the industry. So let me give you 1 second. Let me share my slides. So I always start with this quotation, which just came to me, which is so relevant in today's world, and I'll read it out to you. FEITIAN is on a mission to eradicate passwords, and I think we jointly share this mission with HYPR and Ciptor as well in terms of going passwordless, and this mission with many other larger enterprises like Microsoft that are on a mission. And let's look at the reason why, right? So we believe that passwords are antiquated, they are ineffective, which you saw in some instances, and I'm sure you've had direct experiences as well. They're inconvenient for sure. They're vulnerable, which we all know now they are, but we're still using them. And the question is why, right? And the lastly is, and it's extremely expensive. And I'm sure in this whole paragraph, what you saw, what caught your attention was the extremely expensive. And you're like, why is password extremely expensive? They're free. And then you kind of understand that they're not free, right? It's an opportunity cost, is a threat to your organization. And so what I say here is we have a much better solution. And you kind of saw the solution, better than I can explain in words. You saw it in the demo that Kevin gave in a very fantastic and detailed way. So I'm not going to spend too much time into the trends that we kind of saw. Kevin shared that, Mikhail shared that, but I just want to share from a different angle, right? Harvard Business Review, has said that most of the attacks actually happen internally in an organization, which we kind of know. We have seen other organizations look at that trend, and the reason is you could, as an organization, have the best firewalls, the best security layers of protection, assuming that the threats are happening from the outside. but according to Harvard Business Review and other authorities, the threats are really inside, right? And what I'll add to this is a lot of it can be, accidents. A lot of it can be third-party, contractors, employees, and not all of it can happen or needs to happen as a malicious intent. It can be an accident, but it just surfaces like that, and then somebody uses that vulnerability. Of course, there are vulnerabilities in the software stack and all that, but this is like, a paradigm shift, and a lot of people thinking, the hacker is like that, malicious, that bad guy, bad character trying to break in brute force, but it doesn't have to be that way. It could be as simple as somebody from the inside. The next one is Microsoft. We talked about why we hate passwords and why we want to eradicate them, and you'll see some numbers in the future in the next slides. Why passwords could be really the culprit, right? It's not really what we think the bad character trying to break in with, their algorithms and their, stuff. It could be as simple as somebody looking at the weakest link and looking at the vulnerability from a password perspective. And I think Microsoft gets it, and that's why they want to, again, eliminate passwords. There are other initiatives around MFA, and we'll talk about those as well. Things like Container Security Initiative, which requires any containers coming in and out of port to use MFA for digital signature and stuff like that. NIST also requires the NIST 863 requires the AAL3 to like have MFA in place. And then there are others like secure banking. We are seeing a lot of our banking customers come to us, say, especially in 2020 because of COVID, as more employees are remote. And more and more customers are not walking into a bank, especially the older population. And guess what? If you tie the two together, you realize that the older population are probably the most vulnerable. They're the ones that are using, the passwords that they can remember. And, I have to say that, I've been in, the security space, especially the identity space, for almost 20 years. And I hate passwords. I just can't remember them, right? And so it is an anomaly between, having passwords being very secure and, at the same time, the brain's limitation, right? We just can't remember complex things. So, there are a lot of other trends, trends you'll see. The one that is very important is the one you see on the right bottom is called the cyber security insurance. And I learned this around like 6 months ago. And what this means is that companies are now realizing that no matter what they do, they can still be compromised. They can still be hacked. And we know that, right? Like, pretty much every big, large organization has been hacked or, gets hacked every now and then. And what these companies are doing is they are taking insurance, just like you take home insurance or your car insurance. There is insurance for your protection from liability and threat and all of that. But the insurance companies are now requiring MFA to be put in place as well, saying, hey, if you want insurance from us, you gotta use MFA as a minimum. So we're seeing all these trends, trends that are also like increasing the use of MFA. And now real quick, I want to share, we talk about why passwords are bad and why we want to do it. And, you might think that, yes, as security vendors, we obviously trying to sell this, but what you need to see is really the numbers that'll blow your mind. The first one is the ransomware, right? These are 4,000 ransomware attacks happening on a daily basis. When you look at it from a numbers perspective, you'll say, well, 4,000 seems like nothing. But, we have been on calls from clients and customers, just like you, that are panicking and that are calling in saying, I have been held hostage of my data and I've been asked XYZ. And I can tell you, honest to God, there's one customer who owned a small, medium business IT shop, and they were held ransom for $500,000, right? And they're a very small, tiny shop, and $500,000 is a lot for them. And what these attackers do is they lock you, they capture your environment, they encrypt it, and they store the private key, and they say, well, if you want to buy the private key back, here's the money you need to send us, right? So 4,000 might seem like a small number, but to the person that's attacked, it can be like life devastating, right? And then you see these 300 million daily attacks. What this means is these attackers are trying to steal passwords, and they're attempting almost 300 million on a daily basis. Some of them are successful, some of them are not. But it tells you what they're attempting to do, right? Where the focus is. And then you see 167 million malware attacks as well happening on a daily basis. All right, and this slide is very important because what the first number you see is the 81%. What this tells you is the breaches are not necessarily happening from somebody breaking from the outside. So this ties in really well with what Howard was kind of talking about. This is either somebody breaking from the outside or inside, but it's all about the passwords. It's credential theft. If I can steal your password, I don't need to break in. That's the analogy that these hackers, this is what the hackers are thinking. One very important thing to remember is the hackers are not trying to look smart or to get an award. All they're trying to do is pay their bills. They're the ordinary people like you and me. They're trying to get in the easiest and the weakest link. And we all know the weakest link is the password. And why? You know that it's hard to remember and it's easy to crack. If you use brute force. And we also know that most of the people recycle their passwords, and this number kind of shows that 73% of the passwords duplicate. What that means is out of 10 websites or 100 websites, 70 passwords are the same, or 10 websites, 7 passwords are the same. That's shocking, right? And guess what? Out of those 10 websites or 10 assets, if few of them are your corporate, pretty much how you're exposing your enterprise or your customer's enterprise to this kind of attack. So so that's why we kind of coming back to the quote I had, we want to eradicate passwords. This slide, real quick, I know we are running out of time. Talks about the whole high security, low security, convenience versus inconvenience. As you can see, some of the traditional forms like messaging, out-of-band messaging, out-of-band voice were obviously not very convenient and they were not also very secure. We know that messaging has been deprecated. Password obviously not very convenient and not very secure. OTP, which you see those keys with digit, the tokens with those digits are more secure, but they're not convenient. X509 obviously is the least convenient, but pretty secure. And then we come to mobile, what you saw, which Kevin showed you. Mobile authenticators are very convenient, very secure. And then also we have the FIDO2, which is passwordless, is also very secure, or rather a little bit more secure because there is no PIN, right? The PIN is also like a password. And so that's, we call it 99% efficacy. Now, when you tie this with a biometric key, for example, or biometric form factor, whether it's on your mobile or hardware key, it makes it the most secure, but also the most convenient. Because convenience, is a very important, factor to consider when you're rolling out to your employees, right? They might care about security, but not as much as you do as a CISO or somebody who's a security professional. And this is my last slide. What I want to show here is, fingerprints is great, biometrics are great, but you might wonder like, hey, are these biometrics, could these be compromised? If they're on a server and somebody attacks your server, are you toast? And what you see on this diagram is the boxes, right? Typical architecture for biometric keys or cards are when you land your fingerprint on our sensor, the sensor sucks in that image of your fingerprint, sends it to the microcontroller, which is a very low power consumption and a very high algo, compute engine. And what it does is it takes your image, converts it into a reference template. So the extraction happens over here. And then it passes over to this blue box, which is a secure element. Now, this secure element is a EAL6 plus certified, really military grade secure element, and nobody can really break into it or hack into it. It's tamper-proof, it has all the right, protection. So it's really very, very secure. And in the initial enrollment process, your fingerprint is extracted, created into a reference template, and then stored into the secure element. And thereafter, only you as the owner of that key or your card have that fingerprint. Nobody else in the world really has it. And also all your private keys, all your FIDO credentials are also stored here. So your private key is really where your security is. If you lose your private key, pretty much you're toast, right? And that's why the secure element is so critical. And we are proud to say that everything stays here. If somebody tries to steal your key, it's pretty much irrelevant because the biometric, this is an asset that you have. It's not what you know. So even if somebody else knows what your fingerprint looks like, they really cannot tamper with it because it is stored in a secure element. And the last thing is that we don't even store your fingerprint. So if somebody steals this and breaks into the secure element, it's nothing but just digital characters, right? Because we extract the fingerprint and all we store is the reference template. The matching happens over here, not in the cloud, nowhere else. So that is why it is pretty much the most secure architecture you can kind of think of. And so with MFA, you can store save yourself with 99% of the attacks, and we highly recommend. I'm sure you can see the passion that's coming through, but yeah, I would highly encourage and recommend everybody to get MFA. And I guess with that, we are open for questions. Or Luis, to you. Luis, you're on mute.
Can you hear me? Okay. Okay, cool. So thank you so much, Gotham. I'm just going to share my screen quickly. Okay. All right. So maybe some of you are not yet familiar who is FEITIAN Technologies and who we really are. We have been in the cybersecurity industry for more than 23 years, specializing in modern authentication using FIDO protocols, oath authentication with numerous certifications from Visa, MasterCard, EMVCo, PCI Security Standards Council, Global Platform, to name a few. Our hardware solutions are available globally as we have main offices in Asia, Europe, and in the US. FEITIAN has a wide range of cybersecurity and authentication solutions. And on this slide, we want to let you know that FEITIAN is a one-stop shop for all of your cybersecurity authentication needs. We also have fingerprint smart cards, readers, cryptocurrency wallet, PKI tokens, and now we are expanding our business in fintech for mobile payment terminals. On the next slide, as mentioned previously, there are two user scenarios that you can use HYPR and FEITIAN FIDO keys together. One for MFA to authenticate to other applications such as Microsoft Office. And the other one is when you want to log into a Windows Workstation laptop using a FEITIAN K9 key with PIV. On this slide, FEITIAN Technologies is so proud of the technology partnerships that we have nourished, maintained, and cherished over the years. We have strong partnerships with Google, Entrust, Symantec, now Broadcom, and we are FIDO Alliance board member and a member of MISA, Microsoft Intelligence Security Association. Our MFA compatibilities are just getting wider, and the latest addition is HYPR. And I also want to include our long and trusted MFA partners over the years, such as Ciptor, Cisco Duo, Ping Identity, WatchGuard, and as mentioned a while ago, Microsoft Azure AD and Microsoft Office. And on this slide, I would just like to feature the HYPR and FEITIAN page for you to know more about information about our integration and compatibility. So you can visit these websites. And FEITIAN has upcoming events that we want all of you to join us, such as the RSA Conference 2021. So last year, we all did it in San Francisco, then the pandemic happened. So this year, we will all do it virtually, and we're going to have our booth set up, and we will send you more information about it. And we are also making the compatibilities with HYPR wider by making our K40 with USB-C connection compatible by adding the PIV applet to it. Watch out when this will be available on our website. And then there will be a second webinar with HYPR this summer or latest fall using FEITIAN biometric keys. So we will post something on our social media when we have established the final date. And we are launching a new addition to our product portfolio. As I mentioned earlier, we are emerging to fintech about mobile payment terminal system. Watch out for the webinar date, and a representative from FEITIAN Tech US and headquarters will take the floor on this exciting fintech launch. And now we are down to the last part of the webinar, the Q&A portion. But before we go over with the questions, if you want to know more about Ciptor and our integration partnership using FEITIAN keys, please connect with them using this email. And if you're interested in a HYPO demo trial, please go to the link provided on the screen and fill up a form, and someone from HYPR will get in touch with you about the demo or trial. And then for FEITIAN, we have a promotion for all of the FIDO keys that you can use with HYPR. Promo code is HYPRFEITIAN, and you will get a 20% off for all of FEITIAN FIDO keys. And now, let me just pull up back everyone. So we are ready for questions. Let's see. I have here, why do I need to use HYPR and FEITIAN to enable passwordless authentication? Is it not enough to use Microsoft Authenticator?
I can do the first answer of that one. It's Michael here from Ciptor. We are working in many countries with meeting up with a lot of different organizations, and what we find out is very common is that you have a diverse environment of infrastructure. You have PC, you have MacBooks, you have Android devices, iOS devices, you run servers on Linux, etc. And normally when you want to deploy like one solution for everything, then it doesn't work with just using the Microsoft Authenticator. Then you need a bridge, and that is what we are using the HYPR for. And also one reason why we are promoting the usage of HYPR is that when you're using the Microsoft Authenticator, you're also using shared secrets, which is something that you get away from when you're using the HYPR technology with passwordless authentication together with the FEITIAN keys. Anything more?
Cool.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Cool. And then we have one more question. Where do you find all stolen data?
Oh, I can actually take that also. It's some of my good area. I will, if you allow, I can share the screen for a very short while.
Please.
And I will show you here what we are doing. We are also scanning the dark web, and this is actually the place where all your data are uploaded and for sale. And as you can see here in this corner here, it's 133 million pages on the dark web that are including a lot of stolen data that people are selling to criminal people. And you can also scroll over here. So if you want to know, for example, in the United States, there is 27 million websites that are for sale. You have here, for example, in Sweden, where I live, it's 2.3 million. If you go into a country like France, you have 13 million. So we can find out exactly what kind of stolen data from each country. And the most scaring thing that we have found out in the last time is this COVID situation. Working from home, starting 1 year ago, you can see the number of data that is being uploaded on the dark web. And this is data that has been stolen from organizations that normally have working from a secure office. And today you use a home computer or a home router. And this is something that the expert on criminal activities are using to steal sensitive information from companies. So you can see here the increase here. It's crazy. So this is where it comes. This is something we can also talk about more in detail if you're interested in that after this session. It's very interesting information to talk about when you work with large banks and large companies. What kind of information actually can you find out about our company on the dark web? So that's something that we can help with as well.
All right, great.
Okay.
We have one more question. I have here, how does HYPR license the solution for the employees' access?
Perfect, I can take that, Louise. Thank you very much. So HYPR are a channel-driven organization. Therefore, typically we would provide commercial proposals through our partnerships with organizations like Ciptor. However, HYPR is delivered as a SaaS platform, and therefore we would license it on a subscription basis. And really what we're looking at is the proactive user account that an organization or an enterprise would have. So the number of individuals that you're looking to provide passwordless authentication for, we would license in accordance to that, and it's on a per active user basis. So very simplistic.
Got it. Okay, sounds good. As we draw near to the end of the webinar, Gotham, would you like to add something, Kevin?
No, I'd just like to thank everybody for taking the time, especially the extended time, because we've run over. I appreciate that. But taking the time to learn more about HYPR and our partners with Ciptor and FEITIAN. And thank you very much for hosting us on your Bright Talk call here this afternoon.
Yeah, I just want to wrap up by thanking all the presenters, the guests, Kevin, Ruby, and Mikhail for coming here and sharing the wonderful presentations and the demo. I'm sure this is very insightful for our customers. I learned a lot myself personally, so I want to thank you all for your time, and hopefully the audience will connect with the right people, and hopefully we can eradicate passwords like we're all passionate about. So with that, thank you everyone, and thanks for your time.
Okay.
All right. Thank you. Next webinar. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.